What would you tell young people who are disenfranchised? What advice can you give them?
Well, I wouldn't give them much advice. I've learned more from a lot of these movements than I've given to them. My focus is delineating power and how it works and why we can't trust it and why they get all that because they're victims of it. And you see with the rise of groups like Black Lives Matter, the traditional black elite, Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, come to Ferguson, they're booed out of the city, same in Baltimore. They get it. They're not buying Obama. And I teach in a prison. I teach, and boy, you walk in that prison, and these prisoners, they understand the system. No, we're going to have to, if we look for hope, it's going to be Idle No More, this great Indigenous First Nations movement in Canada, Quebec students movement. There's a picture of me going off to get arrested at Goldman Sachs, and I've long given up trying to look hip. So I'm dressed kind of like this. I think it was a tweed jacket. And I'm surrounded by all these people who are like pierced and tattooed, and boy, that's where I get my energy from. I think they're wonderful. So I don't think I have a lot to teach. I do in terms of, I think, explaining power and how it works and the breakdown of power. But in terms of what we need to do, in terms of the mechanics of revolt, I've certainly found among Black Lives Matter and among all of these groups a kind of really amazing creativity, political consciousness, sense of innovation, maturity. Yeah, I learn as much from them as I give to them.
If I'm the government and I know who Chris Hedges is, I'm probably thinking that you're not quite my friend. You might be an enemy to my interests. Do you think sometimes that you've been spied on by NSA or FBI?
I know they watch me because I've been stopped at airports and asked obnoxious questions, and at one point not allowed into the United States for an hour or two at Newark. But it's just, I think it's more like they're just kind of dicking with you. They're just trying to show you.
Yeah, that's happened to me before, actually.
They're just trying to say.
You get the quadruple S. And
what happens is I get there and I see the face of the Homeland Security change. I don't look dangerous, but I can see their face change, and oftentimes they get like really kind of caustic and rude. And I think the people they're really scared of are the hackers. I don't think. The people who really frighten them are the hackers. Because the hackers, we have to back up. So when you have wholesale surveillance, you can't have investigative journalism. Because when somebody inside the systems of power reaches out to a journalist to talk about fraud, criminal activity, malfeasance, lies of the government, they're instantly traceable. That's why Snowden fled. Traditional investigative journalists who once the role of investigative journalism is to shine a light on these inner workings of darkness, whether in the government or anywhere else, and expose this to the public. And that's very important to the health of a democracy. That's gone. Government officials are just too terrified to speak. So the hackers are the last group. Jeremy Hammond, Chelsea Manning, Julian Assange, of course, the people with the ability to break down those walls and give us information about war crimes, for instance, in the case of Chelsea Manning and WikiLeaks.
How do you feel about the mainstream media? If you think that all these corporate powers are always in play, is anything sacred anymore?
So the mainstream media, what happened is so Clinton deregulates the FCC. That allows Viacom, General Electric, Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, Disney, Clear Channel, they seize, about a half dozen corporations seize the airwaves. So this shrinks the parameters of acceptable debate, first of all. And you saw it like over Syria. What's the debate on Syria? Well, should we just bomb them, or should we bomb them and put boots on the ground, as if that's the debate? It's what Freud called the narcissism of minor difference. So the electronic media gets bought up by these large corporations. Now, it's not like the old Hearst newspaper empire, which were media conglomerates. Media is just one revenue stream, perhaps out of hundreds of revenue streams, and they have to compete against those revenue streams. So it's all about money, ratings and money, basically, and they'll do anything for it. So I think the corporate media has now been so eviscerated that I would argue, at least on the commercial networks, they're not interested and don't do journalism anymore.
Well, what do you make of these new media companies? Like, what do you make of Vice? What do you think?
I think that they play the kind of role that has always been played in journalism, which is that so-called alternative media, which I would argue does far more real journalism than the established commercial media, pressures the mainstream media to do their job. That's always been the case. That's why the CBC in Canada or the BBC in Britain or public television and public radio in the States, which has been destroyed, is so important, because you should have a place in your society for people who are not beholden to business interests, corporate power, and the elites. And that's why they destroy those mechanisms. I mean, you go back to the 60s, we used to see Noam Chomsky on public TV. And we need those voices. You need those. It's hard, because if you really challenge dominant power is not going to invest in your operation.